Beauty. I added the wrong Anil.
Yeah, that was my fault.
That's my bad too. That's my bad. Welcome back, man. Welcome back. Back at it for another episode of Class to the Lab with Sean and Anil. Going to be diving into a few topics this week. Yeah, welcome back, man. Everything was good this week.
Yeah.
Obviously, dealing with some situations, some unprecedented times, but we're here to just kind of bring people together and hopefully share some knowledge at the same time, right?
Yep. All right. So I guess we can just start it right off today.
For sure.
As Sean mentioned, we're doing a post on Monday, kind of on the art of coaching, and a post on Tuesday about the science of coaching. And we're going to use those two posts to kind of give us our topics going into the podcast this week. So Sean's post on Monday was Momentum Monday, we're going to call it, and he kind of talks about how he stages like his weekly goals in order to try and hit something new every day and trying to like build out his week, so to speak. How do you kind of go about doing that?
Yeah, so I kind of, I usually try to do what I call like a weekly game plan. In the post itself, it kind of breaks it down. But the way that I like to do things is it just gives me that game plan, that roadmap to the things that I want to accomplish throughout the week, the things that I want to make sure that I'm doing for myself as well. And it's interesting because I remember I used to always do this. I've been doing this for a long time now. Every Sunday night I dial in, write my goals, all that type of stuff. But I used to always kind of start with my professional goals or like the goals that I want to get done for work. But then recently, over the past few months, I've really kind of shifted that and gotten into more laying out the more personal goals. And it's really helped me kind of become more self-aware of a lot of things that are really important to me. And it allows me to prioritize other things that are really important outside of work, right? Family, making sure you're controlling your downtime with productive things. So that really helped me kind of find that balance between work and life. And I think that's an important thing to kind of, strive for is that balance, that work-life balance. People talk about it all the time. But it's obviously really hard to do. It's not something that can be done overnight. You got to kind of chip away at it, always trying to keep building on it. But yeah, for me, just putting my personal goals first and foremost has definitely allowed me to kind of see things from both sides and put emphasis on both the personal side and the professional side, and not be too geared in on the professional side of things. And some of you guys, like, for example, a lot of you guys are not in the professional ranks yet. So that professional goals that you might be right now could be something different for right. Might be your academic goals, it might be your athletic goals. Your personal goals can, if some of you guys are working part-time or doing whatever to kind of make some extra money, those personal goals might be, or you might put some of your work goals within your personal goals, that type of stuff. So for me, it just provides that reference back and forth. I'm able to journal. I journal every day, so I'm able to refer back to that game plan and write down the things that I'm trying to accomplish throughout the week. And another key point is I always, whenever I start journaling or whenever I start this weekly game plan, I always try to focus in on the things that I'm grateful for, express that gratitude, and then everything kind of, it's like a snowball effect. It just rolls off of that, and it's just kind of easy to, once you kind of have that down pat, it's easy to kind of, figure out what you really want to accomplish.
So, okay. So I get that you kind of put all your goals down, but what happens when you aren't able to complete a goal that you kind of put down? Like, do you get on yourself? Like, I know as an athlete, like, you're kind of always hard on yourself. Is that the same way you kind of work with your goals?
To a degree, like, you're never, I don't know. There's obviously days that you write down your goals and stuff that you want to get accomplished and you don't get it all done. Like, and I used to be really hard on myself in terms of, negative self-talk. And I was really like that in sport when I was young as well. But I guess when you just develop that confidence, once you start chipping away at accomplishments and you start actually seeing things get done, I think it's about that positive reinforcement to yourself and just telling yourself, you're getting stuff done. Don't worry, don't fixate too much on the number side of things. Like, you have your tangible goals in front of you. Just try to chip away at it, and that positive self-talk is something that's important in sport and in life.
So, okay, how do you keep long-term perspective in a time like this? So, like, in a time like you're kind of like you're praying on a weekly basis, but do your weekly goals kind of build up to a long-term goal, and do you find kind of living in where we are right now affecting that?
I mean, definitely in these times, it's certainly affecting you because there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of, not really knowing what's unknown when it comes to tomorrow, right? You're not really sure what's going to happen. So obviously, from a long-term perspective, it's hard to really see much further than where we're at right now. But I think the principle always underlines the goals and the accomplishments as well. You got to have that big picture perspective. When it comes to that. And long-term goals are important, but those short-term goals are the roadmap to the long term. So I think it's important that you kind of find again. It's always kind of going back to that balance. You find that balance between working towards your short-term goals and long-term goals, and just chip away at it, and just try to stay positive with all that type of stuff.
So on that, do you have any goals that you're kind of working to when all this is over?
I mean, right now, a goal of mine is just to continue building the relationships with people that I've been connected with within my school, within the community that I work with, guys like you, other coaches. So that's a goal of mine, at least in these times. When this is all said and done, I still want to be the best coach that I can be. A goal of mine this year was to get my CSCS. Obviously, stuff like that's been a little bit put on hold given the situation. But I think coming out of this, that's something that I really want to get done as soon as I can, is get that CSCS written. And be a certified strength and conditioning coach.
Right.
Guys, the NSCA.
That is the goal.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's hard in this time, in like a time like this, to like set long-term goals. I think, but on top of that, I feel like it's like a good time to set long-term goals because we can actually work toward it. Like I think for both of us, setting up like a podcast, we've kind of literally talked about it for 2 years since we started working together. We've talked about. We just literally never had any time to do so, and so I feel like a time like this has given us the opportunity to kind of put this together and kind of like start building like a knowledge, like start helping those that are younger than us. Again, we both have about 10 years of experience in the field, and like we can start giving back. I feel like both of us do a good job of coaching our athletes, but now I think we're at a point where we can start coaching other coaches. And I feel like some of the best coaches in the industry are good at coaching other coaches, not just coaching athletes. I feel like that's when you can start actually start displaying your knowledge, is when you can start giving back to the profession that has given us so much.
For sure, man. Coaching is teaching, right? Yeah. And you see it every day, but no, you hit the nail right on the head there. So like, obviously in these sort of times, what are some things that you have in terms of goals? What do you want to accomplish during this time?
So I feel like the two things for me, the biggest thing that I'm trying to accomplish is kind of like getting my platform. Like I made my first post, which is something that people have been telling me to post for the longest time. Yeah. I feel like it's just, for me, I have like imposter syndrome, where I feel like no matter what, someone's going to know more than me. So everybody knows more than you. And like you're always going to be like, you never want to be the smartest person in the room. And I get that. But like whenever I want to post something, whenever I want to like have an idea, I was like, someone's already done this. Someone could do this better. And like getting past all that, just because I have all this time on my hands to do so, has been helpful. Like just I put out a post, my first post on Tuesday, and I'm going to continue to hit that. Just trying to, even if I'm wrong, at some point I'm going to look back and be like, I'm glad I started it. 4 weeks down the road, hopefully I start hitting on some good posts and like working from there. Second thing I'm trying to do is like, when I'm out of this, is trying to be a better coach, as you said, like trying to do as many CEUs as I can. The great thing about like this time, the NSCA has put out so many free resources. And just when I get back into coaching, I want to be that much better. This is like a sabbatical. I don't want to take this 4 weeks off and Netflix and chill. I want to take up these 4 weeks off, or however many more weeks we have off, and come back like loaded and ready to go. 1%
better every day, right? 1%
exactly.
better. So let's kind of dive into what you were talking about in your post there with Technical Tuesday. You kind of broke down core stability amazingly. A great job with that. But what do you consider the core?
So I think when we talk about stability we can break down stability on many different things. So stability, I think we can break down stability from a joint by joint concept, or we can break it down from our core concept. I think today we're just going to talk about the core. So I think when we define the core, I think it's a controversial topic in strength and conditioning and personal training, just because there's no solid fact of what the core is. But for what we're doing here today, and I think athletes in general, I think the core can be anything that can be considered the axial skeleton. So that's your torso and your hips. So anything that's not your legs and your arms, I think for our sake, we're going to consider that the core.
Right. And what about the neck?
So I think the neck, from my definition, I don't think it works. However, I think the neck is a core piece, because I know for a lot of people who do concussion management, try to increase neck stability. And on neck
Yep.
stability, like you're trying to increase neck. I don't know how much it works and what like the literature would say on that, but I think next when you're trying to like secure the neck and trying to control the head, I think the neck does work as a stabilizer of the head.
For
So
sure.
maybe you could consider the core of the head
Mm.
if you want to get technical with it.
Yeah. I've always been taught like the pillar or the core of the body is pretty much from the neck down, like what you kind of
Right,
described
exactly.
into the hips, right? And I think the hips is a big aspect of it. Pelvic stability is huge when it comes to
Exactly.
preventing injuries of the lumbar spine, right? So
Exactly.
that's it. And I love seeing more half kneeling stuff being done. That's huge for developing that pelvic stability for sure. So outside of the core itself, how would you define stability then?
So I think stability is from an athletic standpoint, and even from like an injury prevention, rehab, general pop standpoint, I think it's going to be the ability to control our center of gravity,
Hmm.
which kind of leads us into our proximal and distal concepts, where it's like our proximal, we have proximal stability in order to like let distal structures like play sport essentially. So I think you would define proximal as like our core. So that's going to be our torso in order to like display distal athleticism. So that's gonna be our arms. So we can use the example of like a baseball pitcher. Like as much as like it is the shoulder and a pitcher uses the shoulder a lot,
Hmm.
he won't be able to generate power unless his torso was generating that power. So again,
Hmm.
using that proximal stiffness, so that torso, in order to generate the power into that arm. So I think it's a
Right.
play between the two. You can't have one without the other.
I say the torso is kind of like the bridge, right? It's kind of
Exactly.
all that
Right,
energy
right. I would agree.
there,
So
right?
like I think even for hockey players, like as I never played hockey a day in my life, and I think a lot of people know that. But I think when
Me
you
neither.
shoot a puck, if I had to guess, if you're shooting a puck, I don't think you would use just your arms. Like I think
No.
a lot of that power is going to come from your hips, lower
Hmm.
body into the shot. Which again you can't do that. It's like one of a great coaches right would say you can't shoot a cannon off a canoe. Basically, what that means is you can't have any of this distal athleticism, so you can't show athleticism without having a nice, strong, stable core. So I
Yeah,
think that's important.
you got to be in control of it. I'll
Exactly.
attest to
You gotta
that.
be in control. You gotta be in
I,
control.
I've been on the ice a couple times this year, and I can't shoot. I can skate, I can do all that, but man,
Yeah.
definitely need to have that solid core stability to be able to take a slap shot. Because man, my slap shots are pitiful. Like a 5-year-old slap shots are way better. I got a nice little wrist shot though. But again, that comes into that's a lot of like that single leg stability and that core stability. All that energy transfers through there, like you were kind of touching
Exactly.
upon, right?
I
So
think even for yourself as like a football player, like if you're going up, like I'm pretty sure you played receiver at York.
mhm.
Like going up to make a catch in traffic, like you're not making catches with your hands without being nice and stable through the torso. You're not getting up. You're not generating any force through your legs to get up.
Mhm.
One, you're not taking contact again without a stable torso. So I think that
Yeah,
is kind of like the basis. Is what I was trying to get at with my posts is that you need to first have a nice stable core until before you can start loading more complex movement patterns, which is sport in general.
of course, that's that foundation, right?
Exactly.
Um, so what do you think? Like, I mean, if a guy's got a six pack, but he's lacking that deep tissue stability, what can a lack of stability lead to?
So I think when we talk about like a six pack, that's like the transverse abdominis. That's
Mm,
one component of the core. I mean, we have the obliques, we have the hips, we have the glute complex, we have all these different structures. So I try not to look at the core as a singular muscle when
right.
we kind of build programs and stuff for our athletes.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah. So I would say what I would try and think of when we're trying to build a core is the different forces that can be generated on the core. So trying to ensure that we hit like the sagittal plane, transverse plane, frontal plane, just making sure that we have a full spectrum of forces acting on the core. So in a nice stable environment. So I think a lack of core stability, one, without core stability, as I said before, it's like a performance decrement.
Mm-hmm.
So like for an example, if like you were to lift your arm overhead, like in the flexion, we get a lot of people that kind of compensate at the low back. That's because, again, we don't have a nice stable core. And if we're compensating at the low back in the flexion, I think that leads to injury. So right there, we could put our lumbar in extension, and that's how we get into some injury. And you can see a lot of overhead athletes that kind of happens.
What kind of injuries would you see from that? Like,
So I think if you were, so maybe like more like a compensation. Say someone needs to get overhead. So if you're an if you're an Olympic weightlifter, you're a pitcher, you're a volleyball player, you're trying to get overhead, and you can't. Say you lack some shoulder flexion,
Hmm.
but you also lack core stability. What's going to happen then is you kind of like you allow your lumbar to extend, and now you're putting yourself into risk because your lumbar never wants to be in extension. That's not a position that it likes to be in.
No, sir.
So how we can first so what the issue is not necessarily core stability at that point. It's shoulder flexion.
Hmm.
However, we can't fix that shoulder flexion unless we start with that stable core. So if I were to go about kind of trying to fix that, I'm thinking, okay, first we try to cue in this core to make sure a rib stacked over hip. That's kind of a cue that we both kind of use a lot.
Yeah.
Now that we ensure that that lumbar spine is not getting out of place, we can start to work on more of those distal structures. In this case, shoulder
Mhm.
flexion.
So that's how you're gonna kind of like incorporate things to
Exactly.
make the core stronger, right?
Exactly. So I don't see that. So yes, we can train the core in like our pallet presses, our dead bugs, in very like isometric environments, which I think is good. But I think in order for the core to be used in its full, for like its full function, it needs to be trained while training other structures. For
Cool.
example, like the front squat, the back squat, the deadlifts. We're not necessarily training the core directly, but without a strong core, as you said, like it's a force transducer. Without not having a strong, stable core, you're going to be all over the place.
No doubt. I totally agree, man. I totally agree. That's awesome, man. That's a great breakdown of core stability, man. I really appreciate that. Um, so yeah, we'll kind of like last week we kind of talked about the differences between personal training and strength and conditioning. This week we kind of wanted to dive in a little bit more into the strength and conditioning side of things. Um, and we're going to talk briefly just about our roles as strength and conditioning coaches. We're going to keep it kind of general because obviously the roles of a high school strength and conditioning coach or a youth strength and conditioning coach and a collegiate strength and conditioning, pro strength and conditioning, they're all going to have different roles or different responsibilities within those roles. But we're going to kind of keep it general. But what do you think like is our primary role as a strength and conditioning coach?
I think if we're talking, we'll stay away from like the art of coaching for today, just to kind of keep it a little more in general. But I think injury reduction is kind of our bread and butter, as much as it is performance. But injury reduction, not that we can't eliminate injury, but we can reduce injury as much as we can.
For sure.
And I think we do this kind of through strength training. I think strength training in itself is the number one benefactor in terms of trying to decrease injury. The lowest hanging fruit with that is strength. If we
Mm-hmm.
can increase a tissue's resilience to load, and so load could be someone getting hit by a 200-pound linebacker. That's probably a light linebacker, a 250
Love
pound
light, but
linebacker. Yeah, 250-pound linebacker. If that person is strong already, then they'll be more resilient to taking that force from that linebacker. So I think being able to increase the resilience of the tissue will be important for injury reduction down the road.
of course, absolutely, man. I think like I always talk to our guys about having your best ability is availability. If you're
Right,
not,
right.
if you're injured, if you're hurt, you're not going to be able to perform at the best of your ability. So that again goes back to that tissue resiliency and laying that foundation of mobility, strength, power, all that stuff comes into play. But again, if you're hurt and you're not able to actually produce or perform, then all of that's for nothing, right? So again, your best availability, or sorry, your best ability is availability.
I think another thing that we kind of, especially like dealing with a lot of hockey athletes, and hockey being such a like a specific sport, like the skill of skating is not something that's natural to anybody. You kind of develop, and on top of that, like the way you hold your stick is going to be biased to one side, and you've done that for 5 to 6 years. I think limb asymmetries is a big thing that we as strength and conditioning coaches should be the first thing that we kind of address, knowing knowing what the sport and the injuries of that sport and the asymmetries of that sport, our goal should be to limit these injuries. I think a quote that you had before is you kind of give them what they don't have.
Mm-hmm.
Like you give them within the weight room what they don't have. So if you're an athlete that's going to be always on the right side, always kind of slumped over, we're trying to in a very anterior chain based athlete, which the hockey player is. In the weight room, we're going to give them the exact opposite of that. We're going to be a posterior chain. We're going to put a posterior chain program together. So I think that's important for when trying to develop a program. And us as strength coaches need to have the knowledge of the sports we're working with, the biomechanics, and the and the injury risks of specific sports.
Sure, sure.
So on top of that, yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah. So I mean, injury reduction I think is important, but I think why people come to us 100% and why I like my job and one of the reasons why I got into this is for performance. And that's kind of what we do. That's kind of what I research. That's kind of like what you do yourself. It's kind of what you're into. So when you're trying to what do you think, what's the first thing you kind of look to do when you're working with an athlete?
In terms of performance gains?
Yeah, just performance.
I mean, I'm always looking to develop power, especially in team sport athletes, because I think a lot of their sport, no matter what sport you play, hockey, football, basketball, it's a lot of times it's played in that acceleration phase and that deceleration phase. And the deceleration phase kind of goes back to what you were talking about with the tissue resiliency, right?
Right,
Being able
right.
to slow momentum down, being able to stop and change direction. That when your tissues are stronger and more resilient to injury, you're going to be able to get in and out of your breaks a lot faster too, right?
True.
So I think when it comes to performance, power is kind of that foundation to, I mean, obviously strength is a foundation to power. But you always want to be kind of trying to work on developing that power side of things. And we like to do things, in a more dynamic environment. I've really been messing around with med balls a lot.
Right.
Especially from a deceleration standpoint too. We've been doing a lot of stuff where we try to slow our momentum down with a little bit of external load, like a lighter med ball, 8 to 10 pounds, where guys they're coming into full extension, they're trying to stop that momentum and then go right back into accelerating and producing that force again. And then, I kind of struggled with it at the beginning myself, where I kind of felt like my force production might have been down a little bit just because I was kind of focused more on slowing the movement down. But once you gain more awareness and get more control of the movement, you actually like the tendency to be more powerful on that reactive aspect of it. Once you slow it down, you come back up to a slam. It feels like there's a lot more. It's almost like you're recruiting more motor units at that point, because you're really trying to forcefully slow things down. And then that potentiation effect, we talk about that kind of contrast training, that potentiation where more motor units are recruited, you're just able to produce a little bit more power into that. So
I guess based on like eccentric load is way harder, and essentially that deceleration that you're talking about in that med ball is an eccentric load on the body.
mm-hmm.
And now you're kind of potentiating that because you're trying to. Do you go the exact same way? Like say you do like a med ball slam into the ground, are you or like a dead stop into the ground? Are you gonna reproduce that dead med ball into the ground, or you're gonna go opposite that into like a triple extension?
I think there's a progression kind of to it, right? Like maybe
Right,
you'll
right.
start off with guys learning that basic kind of slam into that, or sorry, the deceleration into a slam. Once they get kind of comfortable with that, maybe you'll do like a deceleration into a reverse toss, and they're really
Yeah.
working on that triple extension.
Yeah.
And once guys are really, really comfortable, because there's obviously that rotational aspects for hockey guys, for football guys that got to change, they got to develop that rotational power. So messing around with like rainbow slams where you kind of come over, work on that big extension, slow that down, then come back up. But again, it's about using your coach's eye and making sure you're not pushing guys too far ahead, because you don't want to be doing like low quality reps with med ball work, right? You're not going to get anything out of it.
Any power work, I would agree.
No,
Low quality.
you're right. And I think like with med ball stuff, like a lot of the times you don't want when you give a guy a med ball and you expect him to do the movement, a lot of times you see them just doing it all with their arms, right?
Right.
Really want guys using their legs, using their hips to generate that force. And I think like I've been also adding in a little bit more like movement based stuff, like a power shuffle into like a toss, and really just again it's that potentiation effect, right? Guys are kind of like setting their feet, getting a little bit better. They're able to use their hips when they add that extra movement into it. And it's really gotten a lot more out of the force outputs, I've noticed for sure. And guys they're just looking faster, just looking more looking more clean, right? Getting them to move through multiple planes and then produce force is sport in itself, right?
And that's essentially an advanced progression of like a core stability training.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you think about it, like as you mentioned, like you need to get your hips, torso all into it. But if the core and hips weren't in sync because of your previous like regressions of core stability, it'd be detrimental almost to like incorporate such high fast movements with the med ball.
It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, injury reduction, right? You don't want to be throwing guys into doing wild stuff. Like we see it all the time with Olympic weightlifting, right? Guys that aren't proficient in the movement, but they're still loading up. And I mean, like when it comes to some of the other pillars that we've talked about, like mobility is a huge thing, right? So, and you're a big advocate to Olympic lifting. So how do you think like I mean, is obviously you use Olympic lifting as a power development, but are there other ways you kind of use it as well?
So I think Olympic weightlifting, I think it's a good confidence builder too. And at the very beginning of at the very beginning, I think if you can teach somebody, I think that the bad thing about Olympic weightlifting is has a bad rap for being a complex movement,
Mm,
which it is. Don't get me wrong, but it's not any more complex than as you were talking about the med ball and a med ball rotation in like using like so many different planes. Like you got horizontal plane in there, then you got the
mm,
transverse plane in there. And that's way more complex and way harder to sync up than it is a hang power clean.
mm-hmm.
However, the hang power clean we can load up as you just said, and now we can get into mistakes. Like, and if somebody doesn't have like lat shoulder mobility in order to get into positions, we get into problems.
And that's something we're always trying to
Yeah,
improve too, right? Is the mobility side of things. That's another kind of pillar under that performance
yeah.
gain thing for sure.
I I think strength training in itself is the best way to increase mobility, and power
Mm-hmm.
training in itself is the best way to increase mobility. Like I think stretching and all that is good, but if you don't load the tissues, and now we can get kind of like talk about strength training as it is enhancing mobility. If you don't load the tissues and force them to adapt, they're not going to get any more mobile. Like we can stretch all day, but if we don't force those tissues to adapt, and that kind of brings us into our strength training. Like if we're not strength training our athletes, we're not increasing the load on those tissues, they're not going to be able to handle the high speed loads that we're trying to push them to on the ice, on the field, on the court. And that's kind of what I think strength training is important again on that.
Definitely, definitely. Strength is one of those pillars that you definitely got to be focusing on. And I think with a lot of the guys that we've worked with in the past, relative strength is something that's kind of like undervalued in the sense where like, you know, when it comes to their sport, like in relation to their body weight, they're not playing with an extra weight vest on their back. Yeah, football's a little different because football you have pads, hockey same thing. You get a little bit of resistance added there, but at the end of the day, you're just trying to move your body fast through space. And I kind of think building that relative strength with pull-ups, push-ups, and proper like quality reps when it comes to that builds like a bigger base of strength and movement potential, right? For higher end learnings, things like barbell bench pressing, other compound movements, right? Just learning how to do single leg RDLs in a warm up and working on those type of things lays that foundation of strength, right? And then you're
So,
able to kind of tap into more things.
all right. So, just kind of let me throw this question at you. Do you feel like there is a specific age in which you need to start lifting weight? Or how do you kind of like determine if someone's ready to put a barbell in their hands?
A barbell in their hands? I don't think there's specifically like an age that you should be looking at. Maybe from a young age. Like you don't want to be throwing a barbell on a kid's back who can't really do it properly. I think it comes down to just like the ability to teach it under a controlled, safe environment, right? Like I have my little brothers right now doing basic stuff with dumbbells and yeah, just dumbbells, bands, and they're 10 and 12, right? And they're starting to learn basic stuff, but the foundation is laid with that relative strength, right? They're kind of learning how to control their body in space. They're learning how to do proper push-ups. They're learning how to do eccentric chin-ups, right? Before they start trying to pull themselves up with crappy technique, all that type of stuff. So I don't think there's necessarily an age that you should be. Again, it kind of comes down to training age or like experience, right? And seeing how guys grow. Because a 10-year-old kid who just started doing some resistance training or strength training, they might pick it up pretty quick, right? And then you can advance them and progress them based on how fast they're developing. I don't think there's necessarily like a chronological way to look at it. I think it should be looked at more of like just have a progressional view on it, right?
Right. They're going to progress differently than others. Like I think the youngest person I ever put a barbell in their hands was in grade 6, and he was in like he could just handle it. Like his training age was he started training in grade 4, so his training age was already 2 years.
Right.
So putting a barbell in his hand, it was just the right time to do it, and he killed it. And at
Mm-hmm.
some point, it's almost easier to put the barbell in someone who's that young than it is to put a barbell in someone's hands who's older, just because someone who's young already has the prerequisite mobility.
Yep, that's key.
It's just kind of built in. So like you can just load the positions and they're way better. The one thing you have to do with that is the speed at which they progress is just so high that they can get so strong. The issue when they get so strong is sometimes their actual ligaments and joints don't don't adapt as fast as their muscles, and we can lead to injuries that way. So just having a good understanding of physiology is important. which kind of goes back to the difference between a strength and conditioning coach and a personal trainer. Sometimes personal trainers aren't going to university and aren't learning those kind of things, and it's just that's how you kind of lead to injury.
I had a thought come in my head when we were talking about mobility. I want to know, what is your perspective on, like, what's the difference between flexibility and mobility?
Good question. So I think the flexibility is more a passive range of motion. So if I were to grab your leg and I were to pull it and I were to push your leg up, wherever I can take your leg, I will consider that your flexibility. Now, if I were to drop that and I would ask you to do it, wherever you can kind of control it will be your mobility. So I think mobility is just active control of a range of motion.
Cool.
So I think that would be mobility.
Right. I've always learned that a big difference between flexibility and mobility, like flexibility kind of deals with more the muscular system, right? And then the mobility is more about the joints, right? Like shoulder mobility, hip mobility, ankle mobility. Like when we refer to that type of stuff, I think it's more of the joints themselves and having, like, again, more active range of motion through those joints, and then developing those angles is important, right?
Yeah, I mean, I could see. Yeah, I could see. I guess I could see. I think you can't have one without the other. Like you can't be flexible, like flexible hamstrings, without having like the prerequisite flexibility within your hip complex
right.
to achieve certain positions. Like you can be as flexible with your hamstring as you want, as you just said, but if your joint castle in your hip doesn't have the prerequisite range of motion or mobility, you're not sitting into a deep squat.
Right, right.
So I think there is no right answer, and I feel like no matter who you ask, you're going to get 10 different answers.
Yeah.
Just having an idea of what the both are and how to improve both, I think is important.
And it's different for everybody, right?
Exactly.
And I think that's something that coaches need to take more into consideration. Like there's not a lot of people that, like, obviously in a young age you can in like a more generalized program, or people who don't have a higher training or have a lower training age, you can give them a more generalized program and they're going to be able to see some results. But coming in to see, the differences in terms of their injury history or whatever else you might want to take into consideration is obviously important in that, right?
Right.
Sure. But yeah, that's kind of like all the topics we wanted to cover in terms of the real, like, science type things. But we kind of wanted to try something new as well. I remember we were talking about it last week, where we go into more like a flow.
Have fun with it,
Yeah, exactly. Because strength conditioning, like, it's a serious game, right?
I think the strength and conditioning coach right now is, one, I think we take ourselves seriously. Mm-hmm. Two, we should. I think people do see us as a joke sometimes, and I think on top of that, we have to see ourselves as professionals, and we kind of carry ourselves as so. But I think the weight room is like a fun place, and I think it should remain a fun place regardless of where you are, high school, university, pro. Just you can have fun while putting in work. But having said that, I think our topic of the day today is, what do you have playing in the weight room? Mm-hmm. Like, what's your favorite music? Wow. Two, is that what you have playing in the music?
I'm a big rap guy, so obviously I'm listening to rap in the weight room. A lot of the people that I've worked with in the past, that's kind of the motivating aspect of music for sure. Recently, honestly, this is a goal of mine. I've been trying to transition more into like clean rap. And trying to find stuff, just so that, like, we're again keeping that level of professionalism up. Is something that I think is important. Like, you don't want to, especially when you're working in a high school, you don't want to have the head of your school or the principal come into the weight room and you're playing explicit music here and there. Like, there's a time and a place, and I get it with some guys, but again, we want to keep that level of professionalism up. But still, you got to have the bangers going, sure, right? Especially on a big lift. Like if a guy, and that's where we make some exceptions, right? Like if a guy or girl wants to hear a certain song because they're lifting heavy, they got a heavy hang clean or a heavy back squat, and they just want to hear something. Maybe we'll meet them in the middle, and throw whatever music they kind of want to hear on, no matter what the genre or whatever it is. Because again, that goes back to building a relationship with them, right? Like they trust you, so you got to kind of trust them as well, right? What about you? I know you're a rap guy, so you're playing.
So I am a hip hop guy.
We worked in the same.
Yeah. So I think I have 3 different types of music when it comes to like the weight room. Mm-hmm. I have the music I listen to if I'm training by myself. If I have music that I'll bump, like just for like if athletes want to listen to music and I am the one in charge that day of the music, it's always going to be hip hop. Again, like you, I try to get more. It's not something that, again, I was hesitant to do it too, just because. I don't know. I was always someone who didn't want to play the clean shit either. Pardon me for swearing, but I was that person that never wanted to do that either. But I get I worked in the private sector, so you have parents coming in. You never want like the stuff that goes on today in hip hop music. You never want that playing as you move through. And the third type of music I think is like that old school rock, like classic rock.
I
Is
like it.
kind of like that other side. If I'm not feeling hip hop that day, then classic rock. But when I'm lifting in the weight room, I'm not gonna lie, I'm usually bumping R&B.
R&B, interesting.
Yeah,
You know
like
what? We've been bumping these things. This is I got all credit goes to the Sack Boys. They
yeah,
showed me this stuff called Big Booty Mix, and man,
yeah,
it's fire. They just
yeah.
throw a whole bunch of different music like rap, old school rap, rock, everything like more pop culture music now. They
Right.
mix it all together. And one, you can kind of throw it on their hour-long mixes.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to worry too much about changing the songs. You just make sure everybody's kind of focused, dialed in. And that's it's something that I've been messing around with, and I actually enjoy it. I listen to that type of stuff sometimes when I'm just
Actually, it's
studying
not
or
bad.
doing whatever.
When I was in the States, the athletes, that's what they all bump, because that's what they all play, because it was also clean too. So like that's something that they all played.
Exactly, yeah. You can find the clean version. There's some explicit version, but you can find the clean versions, no problem, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Just to address this question here, like honestly, I don't have for Farah there. You said, yeah, what are my thoughts on intermittent fasting? I'm not necessarily the right person to be asking about that. I'm not a nutrition guru behind me. I have the general guidelines when it comes to nutrition, and that's what I try to preach. But if I were to have that question asked to me, I would always try to refer out to somebody else who's a little bit more well versed in that. So I'm gonna put a plug here for my man, the Kaizen strength coach. That guy. If you have any questions about nutrition, anything like that, hit him up, man. Hit him up. The Kaizen strength coach. I'll tag him in here real quick. The Kaizen coach. He's your man when it comes to nutrition or any kind of questions like that. That's for sure.
I think simply intermittent fasting just another, like it's just another way for you to follow your, like whatever your calories are for that day, whatever your macronutrients are, just another way to input it into your day. But again, yeah, Kaizen strength coach is the person to follow for that.
Yes,
and like
sir.
Wesley's comment here, I think that's actually it's a really good point, how different music kind of affect people's bodies. I wonder, I'm assuming that's from a psychological standpoint. I can't see that being physiological, but yeah, I would agree. Like when I'm in for a heavy lift, like I have to be playing like some weekend. I don't know why it has to be the weekend, but for a heavy lift, it's always got to be the weekend. I can't have like bangers playing when I'm trying to like get into the zone. I think it puts me, if I'm trying to do like hypertrophy work, then yeah, I'll play bangers all day because that's just fun.
Yeah,
But
just
for like a big lift where like it matters, then I need something that like kind of calms me down. I think parasympathetic versus sympathetic. Obviously, you want to be more sympathetic, but I think there are times when you can be too sympathetic. Like you hear all the time, like players that are just way too jacked up. If you watch like college basketball at the end of games, or players are just way too jacked up, the whole playbook goes out the window, and now you're just jacking up threes. I feel like at that point you're just way too sympathetic,
right.
And use some relaxation just to like go through what got him there in the first place.
That balance, man. That balance. Yeah. Right. Just to kind of touch upon this question here, any advice on fat loss? I mean, it all comes down to calories in, calories out, right? My biggest piece of advice to you would be to look at downloading the MyFitnessPal app. I think it's by Under Armour. Whether it's fat loss or weight gain, either or. Once you have those numbers and you start tracking things, you're able to make those necessary adjustments. If you're just eating and trying to lose weight without actually tracking anything, you're just guessing at that point, right? So I think having the numbers in front of you and you're able to make those necessary adjustments as needed is definitely important. And I mean, that comes down to training too, right? If you're not tracking your training, then there's no real way to see your progress or make the adjustments that you needed to make more progress, right?
Yeah, exactly. I would agree. Like MyFitnessPal has probably been the biggest help in terms of, again, I'm not a nutritionist. I think I hate nutrition, to be honest with you. Like that's not my area of expertise. But MyFitnessPal is probably the biggest go-to and helpful tool when learning how to feel your body and how it affects your body type thing.
Yeah, man. Men lie, women lie, numbers don't lie. So once you have those numbers, you can make those adjustments. That's for sure. So hopefully that helps you out, my man.
Cool.
All right, man. Well, that's about it. I think we kind of covered a lot of stuff. This was good. I think we're a little bit better than last week.
So, I think we were.
Progress. That's what we're striving for.
All right.
All right, man. Appreciate it. We'll see you next week.
Same time, same place.
You got it.
All right.
Thanks, brother.